Pickleball has another paddle controversy on its hands. This post uploaded to the Kitchen's Facebook group sparked some interesting discussions regarding the legality within the pickleball industry, whether pros get special treatment with their paddle accommodation. And the post reads, "Question for USA Pickleball and all referees. The racket club I work at recently got their hands on one of Catherine Parento's personal paddles. For anyone that isn't familiar, she uses the Tempest Rain Pro. Paddletech's paddles do not have any grit on them, at least ones you can buy. Catherine's paddle was clearly raw carbon fiber and had a ton of grit to the paddle face. I checked the paddle approved list and found Paddletech has no new paddles approved since 2021. If you look closely, you can tell Catherine's paddle and Andrea Coop's paddle both have raw carbon fiber face. I'm very confused how this is legal if the paddle isn't approved." So this anonymous poster, who has since deleted this, is posing the question whether it's legal for these two players, Catherine Parento and Andrea Coop, to use a supposedly non-approved paddle that is modified for specific purposes. But before we get into the specifics, I'm going to give a quick shout out to 11 Pickleball, who is sponsoring this video. 11 Pickleball is a premier pickleball apparel company. So go give them a follow on their Instagram, because you could be lucky enough to win one of their giveaways, which they're doing every day the entire month of January. And you can also use the code 5th at checkout on their website for 10% off any of their apparel. The links for their website and the Instagram will be in the description down below. But now back to the story. If you remember, about 8 months ago, during the US Open, there was a pretty shocking decision by USA Pickleball to ban the carbon paddles. This was in the midst of the middle of the tournament, which left players scrambling to find a replacement paddle. Carbon's grit levels tested way higher than what the maximum levels allowed, and carbon was all the rave at this time. Some of the top players, even like JW Johnson, was using it and getting wins over Ben Johns. So what was apparently happening was carbon sent in paddles that had the legal grit limit to the USA Pickleball Association, and they were approved. Post-approval, some of the paddles had grit above the legal limit, and it was very noticeable by other players as carbon was gaining a lot of traction on the pro scene. A similar accusation has been made here with Paddletech, which apparently has made modifications only available to some of their top players. The NML blog has written a really interesting and detailed piece on this subject, so go check that out. And they were able to confirm that Paddletech does indeed provide special services on its paddles for both Andrea Coop and Catherine Parento. So this begs the question of how and why hasn't there been any repercussions or crackdowns by USA Pickleball if this is widely known among the pro scene. Pickleball Studio hosts a podcast and are both quite the experts in paddle intricacies and modifications. And with their credible sourcing, they basically confirm these accusations had a lot of validity to them, and also that these aren't the only players and paddle companies that are doing this.
Obviously, we know in every sport, golf, tennis, whatever, they all have custom equipment. That makes sense. But in pickleball, every paddle is supposed to be on the approved list. Even if you change a graphic, you add some grit, whatever, it's supposed to be added to the list. And you can clearly tell that isn't happening. I know for a fact that isn't happening. I have spoken to companies that have told me this is happening, that these pros have a custom paddle that no one can buy, and it is not like the original one. So I absolutely know for a fact that that is a thing. And I just think people know they're cheating, I guess. Like with how the ways it's set up, you're not supposed to have a custom paddle without it being on that list.
Yeah.
If you put it on the list and just don't sell it, whatever.
Yeah, that's
fine.
fine.
Look at the 002A that James uses. It's, you can't buy that, but James can use it. So it's like, I don't know why people wouldn't just do that, unless some of the paddles have, not only have they been custom, maybe they've also been illegal. I have heard from some very reliable sources, like highly, highly reliable, that some of these paddles these pros are using have been quite illegal over the grit.
Okay.
And I've even had questions. Actually, I'll leave that one out just in case that gives anything away. We'll leave that out for
Okay.
now. you gotta keep the sources safe. You know what I'm saying? But anyways, with the article that NML wrote, it just named Coop and Catherine. They didn't know about Anna Lee, and it sounds like there's a possibility that Coop and Catherine have been using a raw carbon fiber paddle, and someone did some digging for me, and there's actually a picture of Coop, I think from the PPA that she won with Vivian David.
Okay.
And I sent this picture to you, David. Or David.
David? Who's that?
What the heck? Will.
Yes.
I sent this picture to you, and you can very clearly see on that paddle that it looks exactly like raw carbon fiber dust on the paddle. Like paddle techs don't do that.
Yeah, it was pretty surprising to me. Yeah, it did look like it.
So why aren't other pros who are abiding by the rules calling players out? The PPA paddle compliance policy is that it falls on the players to keep others accountable. So what does this mean exactly? We saw this instance happen once this year, in which Annalie Waters lost to Paris Todd and asked the PPA to check Paris Todd's paddle after the match. Post-match, they checked Paris Todd's paddle and everything came back within legal levels. Annalie Waters received some backlash from this by the fans, and we haven't seen anyone try this since. And I personally didn't understand the backlash from this, considering this is the only way for PPA players to keep other players and paddle companies accountable. On the other hand, USA Pickleball governing body does claim they do periodically randomly test paddles. Their infield testing works as follows. If the paddle appears to not be compliant per the infield test, it must then be sent to the lab to be tested and receive a certified result. Specific details of the results for tests performed in the field or at the lab are confidential and first shared with the manufacturer. If necessary, a product is then removed from the publicly available approved list, even if this occurs during an ongoing competition. Publicly, a product either meets the approved standards verified by the lab results or it does not. This is also from their website. Please note that if at any time the equipment is implied to have been materially changed by the manufacturer, or if the equipment materially degrades or changes under ordinary use to significantly alter the nature of play, compliance testing may be required. Personally, I think the best way for professional pickleball to solve this dilemma is to have another third party do random paddle tests immediately after tournaments. This would follow a similar process to what the governing body of USADA does with the UFC, which randomly tests athletes in the UFC organization at completely random times. It would create more transparency among the players and fans, and there wouldn't be a conflict of interest. The professional pickleball tours don't really have any incentive to solve this issue due to them wanting to be accommodating to players, and many top paddle brands advertise on these tours. You may think paddle modifications couldn't be that big of a difference, but when we're talking about slightly marginal differences in terms of skill, anything to even gain a slight edge can help you advance to the upper echelon of players. This probably won't be the last time we see some type of paddle controversy. There needs to be more transparency from the regulators and enforcers. In the comments of the NML article, Carl Schmitz, who's head of the USA Pickleball Equipment Standards / Facilities Development regarding their process and protocol, which he stated, because of the flood of new paddles, specifically those with a higher friction carbon phase, we are scaling up our compliance sampling program, upgrading the technology used for both certification and compliance testing, and testing a paddle control process similar to that of the ITTF. This was piloted at Nationals with over 150 pro paddles being tested for compliance. And I think this does sound really promising, but I guess we will have to wait and see if they're able to implement this successfully. So what do you guys think about this whole situation? Do you think a whole new revamp should happen within the USA Pickleball protocols? Or let players call out other players if they think their paddles aren't up to standards? Let me know in the comments below. Also, thanks for watching, guys, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button and also give this video a like. I'll see y'all in the next one.